From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is facing widespread criticism following recent remarks describing autism as an epidemic and making controversial statements about the capabilities of people on the spectrum. Now, those comments have prompted backlash from medical professionals, from disability advocates, from members of his very own family, as well as people who have autism. Now, in response, Kennedy has announced plans to launch a national autism registry as part of a broader effort to study potential environmental causes because he believes autism is a preventable disease. There is no medical evidence to back that belief up. So joining us now to talk more about the implications of all of this is Dr. David Pate. He is the former CEO of St. Luke's Health System and the co-author of the book, Preparing for the Next Global Outbreak. Hi, Dr. Pate.
Hi, Gemma.
And remember, if you have a public health question, send us an email, idahomatters@boisestate.edu. So, Dr. Pate, let's begin our conversation today with some basics. What is autism?
So, autism has evolved over as we've gotten greater understanding of it, that it's not one particular disease or disorder. It is a whole spectrum, which has led to the more recent phrase autism spectrum disorder, because there is a wide range of potential manifestations. And these changes they're diagnosed by a combination of two things. Parents making observations of their young children, usually in the second and third years of life, and a trained physician or developmental specialist also making observations. And together, we can use that information to determine whether the child is autistic or whether and where they might fit on that spectrum.
So my understanding as well, Dr. Pate, according to numerous scientific studies, autism is actually genetic. In fact, the CDC says that 80% of cases are linked to genetic mutations, saying it does run in families, and that other 20% is linked to some other genetic mutation. Why is this important for people to understand when we're talking about autism spectrum disorder?
Well, it's important because parents understandably are looking for answers, and we want parents to be informed that there are a lot of bad actors and have been since the late 80s that have been proposing various ridiculous causes of autism. The most infamous being Dr. Andrew Wakefield, who proposed that the measles virus caused it, and then ultimately that the MMR vaccine caused it. And that has been thoroughly debunked both by science and by an investigation into the background of his study, which actually turned up fraud, and that the findings were being paid for by a law firm that was trying to promote lawsuits to recover injuries for children. I think that's really a terrible thing to do to parents, and I think parents want correct information and they can handle it. But you are quite right. In the studies that have been done since, very large scale studies looking at twins and families to look at the causes. And what we find is, just as you said, there is a very strong genetic predisposition, and it's not just one particular gene. There's a number of genes that can predispose to this. And most often, even the people that were in the study, that the small study that Dr. Wakefield published, they found that those children usually had manifestations and the parents realized something was off prior to them ever getting the vaccine. And so we believe that this is a neurodevelopmental disorder that begins in the womb way before these children would have received the MMR. And I think his theories have just been thoroughly debunked.
And Dr. Pate, to go a little bit further, the CDC also says that there is no evidence that children can develop autism after early fetal development as a result of exposure to things like vaccines or postnatal toxins. And again, this is where a lot of this debate comes in, especially with someone like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is now the head of Health and Human Services, who he truly believes that this is a preventable disease. I'm using his words, preventable disease. Can you talk about that and why his belief is not backed by science?
Right. Well, I'm not at all sure what Secretary Kennedy really believes, or and the reason I say that is because for a long time before assuming this position, he ran an organization that was the financial model was based on taking anti-vaccine stances. And so when, it's an obvious conflict of interest. So I just simply don't know if he's sincere in his beliefs or if this is a money and fame opportunity for him. I don't know. I can't read his mind. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, his theories are totally debunked. And the problem is that there are a lot of people who still have trust in people in top government positions who are going to believe what they say, assuming that, like most of us have felt most of our lives, is that the government was there to serve us. The government had these resources of scientists and studies to answer these questions for us. And so for the head of the Department of Health and Human Services to actually be peddling this stuff, not only is spreading disinformation, but is clearly hurting people, because what has happened as a consequence of all this unnecessary fear-mongering about the MMR vaccine is we're dealing with the largest measles outbreak that we have dealt with in decades. And so, people are going to get very ill and people are going to die from that. In addition, he's peddled other things like the whole vitamin A preventing measles, and people have relied on that. And in fact, it's been proved it does not prevent measles. So some of these children have gotten severely ill with measles and more ill because they had too much vitamin A, which can cause damage to their livers. So this is harmful. It is incredibly damaging to the healthcare workforce who we just know that this is disinformation, and yet here is somebody in one of the highest positions of authority spreading it. And of course, it gets worse with his announced study that he's going to do on autism.
And I want to talk about that study in a minute. But first, Dr. Pate, according to the CDC, 1 in 36 children have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Now, that can seem like a shocking number. And I think this is where some of this debate comes in about, well, then how can it be genetic? How can this happen, in fetal development? This somehow has to be happening because of the environment, right? Or because of something like vaccines. And I'm wondering, just like many diseases or many disorders, the more information we have, then the more we know. So therefore, more people can be diagnosed, but also diagnosed earlier. I mean, we've seen the same thing with certain types of cancers, right? More people get diagnosed, but it's because we have more scientific evidence. Is that what, in your opinion, is happening with autism spectrum disorder?
Yes, I think it's a combination of several factors. Number one is our understanding of autism and the various disorders in that spectrum has greatly grown over the last few decades with so much research being done about this. And secondly, the state of our ability to do genetic analysis is something that has advanced in recent decades. And then we have added uh, validated screening tests that for those with young children, you realize that when you're going into the family physician or the pediatrician, they're doing some screenings that you might not have been aware of before because we have these tools now to help us identify those children, just as you said, Gemma, a lot earlier. The other thing that happened is it used to be thought that autism, by some, not by the mainstream, but autism was a disease of white people and well-to-do people. Well, that was because those were the people that had access to healthcare, and so
Mm.
they were getting the diagnosis. But after the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion and services that ensured more access to care by those in that are socially economically disadvantaged and other races. What we've seen is the reports of autism spectrum disorder in those populations is increasing, not because they're having an epidemic, because more of them are actually seeing physicians, getting tested, and being able to be diagnosed. Now, I will say that our field of genetics and understanding of genetic contribution to diseases is greatly increasing. And we understand that what can often happen is you have this genetic predisposition that does not 100% determine that you will or will not get the disease, even if you have that genetic trait, but that various factors on top of that can influence whether that gene will be expressed and you will develop the disease. And so, one thing that we have found is that actually there are some infections that occur to mothers who are pregnant that can affect the developing fetus, and with that genetic predisposition, that in combination may now increase even more the chances of being on that autism spectrum disorder. And that's one of the concerns of scaring people about vaccines is that we're going to see more of these challenges, and then they will again point to, oh, look, see the epidemic. No, it's not an epidemic. It's because you're not giving mothers good prenatal care. And then those children, those with the genetic predisposition, are manifesting it.
Mm. I want to talk next about this study that Secretary Kennedy is planning on doing. And they are set to get private medical records of Americans for this new autism study. In fact, yesterday it was announced from CBS News reported that the NIH will provide Kennedy with data that's pulled from a number of federal and commercial databases, things like pharmacies, labs, etc. First off, Dr. Pate, is this usual standard of practice in a study? And I'm asking that because I don't know.
Well, there are a number of things that are distinctly unusual about this study. And those of us that understand how medical research is done, and those particularly that do medical research, are just in shock and disbelief about this. So here's the situation. First of all, when we conduct medical studies, medical research, we understand that you need to be able to reproduce results to have full confidence in it, because any one particular study could be misleading. They can have, there can be bias in it. It could be that the population studied was not generally applicable to the entire population. There could be a number of reasons. And when we see something that is going to be new and different from what our previous understanding is, we like to see that it's replicated in other studies to make sure that it is a true finding. Well, what we have lots of well done prospective and retrospective studies that have looked at this question and have all determined no, the MMR vaccine does not cause autism. What he's proposing is one study to answer the question. So there's the first thing. That's not how science works. Number two, these studies have occurred over years or decades, and he announces, oh, we'll have the answer by September. Well, no serious scientist would ever announce the date that you'll for sure have the answer, because we don't know. And number two, wouldn't dare say they're going to hinge everything on results in 5 months or something. The third thing is, a key principle of doing medical research is you don't predetermine the answer. In other words, you do have a hypothesis and you want to test that, but you have to be open to the possibility that maybe your hypothesis is wrong. Maybe the study will prove that was not it. In fact, whereas we already have Secretary Kennedy, who has told you what he knows to be the answer, supposedly, and then look at who he got to run this study. And again, most of us are just in shock. First of all, this is a person who has already been discredited. He did other studies, and multiple organizations have said they're just so flawed that they cannot be worth anything. Number two, this is a person who has already been disciplined for practicing medicine without a license. And the third thing that is just shocking to me, because you and I know that if you want to get one of today's Republicans all in a tither, all you have to do is talk about giving sex hormone changing therapy to children. That's what this person did. He thought he was treating autism, and he gave hormone blockers to children, and he's not a doctor. And yet the Republicans want to get behind this and say, oh, this is just so super. I just really don't know this. I'm a Republican, and I don't know what Republicans believe anymore.
Before we take a break, Dr. Pate, what are your thoughts on Secretary Kennedy launching a registry that will track Americans with autism?
Well, I think the problem is I don't know. It's certainly possible that most of these things, you can use them for good or you can use them for evil. Right now, I have lost a lot of trust in if I look at the people that are leading the Department of Health and Human Services, the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, these are all professionals that I lost respect for during COVID because of the ridiculous things that they've touted to the public. So it's hard for me to have confidence in it. I hope and pray it will be used for good. I fear it will not.
Dr. Pate, the Trump administration is set to cut funding on an historic initiative that not only was it the first, but it was the largest that was centered on health needs of women. I'm talking about the Women's Health Initiative. Now, this has gone on for the last 3 decades, this initiative, and it has centered specifically on women's health. I'm talking about things like heart attacks, cancers, hormonal issues. Dr. Pate, can you explain to us a little bit more about the Women's Health Initiative before we get into the funding part of it?
Yeah, this is a real shame. This is a very important study group. It's over 40,000 women who have been volunteering to provide lots of information to the study leaders over more than 3 decades. And this has given us a lot of what we call longitudinal data that has allowed us to study women as they're aging. Like I just said in the prior segment, the thought of doing a study in 5 months is really just quite shocking. And yet, most studies, we don't get the opportunity to follow people this long. And it's an incredible opportunity for us to study health effects on women as they age because we know that risks of various diseases, breast cancer, osteoporosis, heart disease, are all also tied to age. But this gives us an opportunity to study these women over a long period of time. And we've already gotten so many great insights from that study that this is going to be a shame because there's a lot of more that we can learn about healthy aging. And of course, again, here's one of the reasons that I get distrust is when people don't give us things that are internally consistent. So Secretary Kennedy tells us he wants to, make America healthy again and find out how to keep people healthy. This is a key study to helping us understand healthy aging in women. It's inconsistent. It doesn't make sense.
So this study has done things like what I mentioned, heart attacks. I mean, for so long, Dr. Pate, there was one set of symptoms when it came to heart attacks. The Women's Health Initiative helped doctors recognize that women tend to have very different symptoms when it comes to heart attack. Can you talk a little bit more, about that? Because these are the things that I think, no matter what your political affiliation is, if you are a woman, you need to understand what the funding cuts mean because it helped doctors understand how to treat women when it came to heart attacks.
Well, you're exactly right. So, what is so critical for doctors to understand, which we do today, thanks to so much of this research, but also women to understand is that, and the men that love them to understand, is women are different from men in more ways than we think. And there are diseases that women get that men don't. There are diseases that present differently in women than they do in men. And you've nailed one of the big ones, and that is heart attacks. So, back early when I was in training in the old days, we were taught to look for chest pain on the left side of the chest, pain that radiates up the neck or down the left arm, and shortness of breath, and that the pain worsens with exertion, gets better with resting. And that's what we look for in everybody, men and women. But what has come to our attention through this is that, in fact, women often present differently. What that means is that a lot of times women who are thinking, oh, those are the symptoms of a heart attack, may not come and see us in the emergency room or the urgent care or their doctor's office to get checked because they're thinking, oh, it can't be a heart problem. I remember my mother-in-law dying of heart disease because she thought she had a shoulder problem. And
Mm.
I wish I had known back then. And so it's very important both for women to know to seek care even when they don't have those typical symptoms, for their spouses or those in their family to know that that could be something of concern, and for all the health professionals to be on the alert that women are not necessarily going to have these classic symptoms if they show up at the ER. We still need to check them out.
And another thing that the Women's Health Initiative has done is with hormone therapy. I mean, Dr. Pate, I believe this was back in the 80s. There was a study that came out that said HRT was very detrimental to women's health. That the Women's Health Initiative was able to continue doing studies, doing research, and finding out that in fact hormone replacement therapy is very beneficial to postmenopausal women. And what we should note is there are about 55 million postmenopausal women in the United States. So again, when we don't have access to studies like this, this could be potentially very detrimental to women's health. And as you said, as women age.
Well, that's exactly right. And I remember those days when we used to have a great consternation about whether we should put our older female patients on hormone replacement therapy and worried greatly about it because we didn't have the data. We didn't have the knowledge that we do from these studies now. And there's so many other things that this has given us new insights, because we often find out that things that we thought were the case in the past either are not true or are far more nuanced as we get more studies, more information. Look at just how much we have learned about the SARS-CoV-2 virus in just 5 years. We've learned a lot. Imagine if we could keep studying this group of women for another 5, 10, 15 years. We will get so much information that will help improve their lives, their health. And these are people that are going to be mothers, grandmothers, wives, sisters, mothers. We should do everything we can to improve their health. And so this is a terrible, terrible shame.
And I do want people to know, and if you just Google Women's Health Initiative, you'll get to the website for the Women's Health Initiative. So this announcement was made yesterday, April 21st, saying that the Department of Health and Human Services will terminate WHI regional center contracts at the end of the current fiscal year, which is September of 25. And then operations will continue until January of 26. At that point, funding remains uncertain at this time. What the WHI goes on to say is that they recognize that this contract termination will significantly impact ongoing research and data collection, especially the detailed participant health event data that is collected. They go on to say the loss of this critical data stream would severely limit the Women's Health Initiative's ability to generate new insights into the health of older women, which, as we noted, Dr. Pate, is one of the fastest growing segments of our population. So again, what do you think the takeaway in particular for women needs to be when the Trump administration has come out and said, this funding is in jeopardy?
Well, I think, of course, advocate. So you need to reach out to your representatives, your senators, and let them know that this is important. And certainly, many health associations are doing that, but we need those voices to be heard. The other thing is we need to understand that this is in a context. In other words, this is not just an attack on this women's health initiative. This is a larger piece of an attack on science altogether. There is disdain for science. There is disdain for these clinical studies and information. And look, the science is what it is, and people should be free to take it or leave it. If you don't believe in gravity and you want to jump off a building, well, you're going to find the consequences of not believing in science. But you should have the rights to take that science and utilize it or not. But we shouldn't stop the science from occurring, because that is what is advancing our cures for cancer, our treatments of diseases that I've already seen happen in recent years, that were diseases I took care of in patients where I thought those diseases were going to be incurable. And we
Mm.
have improved so many things that we all need to have an interest in making sure science progresses. Whether you want to follow the science or not, that's your decision. But the science is good, because one day you might have one of these problems and you might want to know what actually works, not some piece of disinformation.
So, Dr. Pate, let's circle back to a topic that we actually haven't talked about in quite a while. This is avian flu. Now, remind us what it is, because we're talking about a particular strain, H5N1.
That's right. So avian flu refers to the fact that this influenza virus is transmitted by birds. And the place where this virus is it starts out with waterfowl. It's in the water, and waterfowl become infected, and then they migrate and they can infect others. And what has happened is that since the beginning of last year, we have had a very unusual, unexpected outbreak of avian influenza, which should be infecting birds and poultry, actually infecting cows. And so we have had dairy cows, and we have
Mhm.
had outbreaks and continued spread of this across much of the United States, including Idaho, which has had quite a number of herds infected. And as a consequence, almost exactly a year ago, we first noted that a rancher or a dairy worker in Texas actually became infected with the virus, and so we realized it could pass from cattle to humans.
And Dr. Pate, just here in the United States, 70 Americans have had the virus. One person has died. You and I spoke in particular about the case of the teen in Canada who was critically ill from bird flu. Um, so now, in the last days and weeks, many doctors and veterinarians who have been fighting this virus, they're getting pretty concerned. Tell us why they're concerned.
Well, we are getting concerned. Number one is the fact that so far, and unfortunately, I think a lot of this is that there was not the adequate response that was needed from the Biden administration. And of course, now with the Trump administration, much of the infrastructure has already been dismantled to deal with this. We're not taking the steps we need to control the spread. So here we are a year later, and we have not been able to stop the spread of this virus among cattle. Now, it would be one thing if that was where this virus is staying, but it's not. It's infecting, as I said, some workers, but it also has been infecting domestic animals like cats, and causes a high mortality rate in them, as well as we've seen other mammals. And the problem is, as your listeners who have listened to me for 5 years are probably tired of hearing, the more we allow a virus to continue spreading, especially an RNA virus, which is what this is, it will mutate. And not only do influenza viruses mutate, but influenza viruses do a particularly unique thing where they do what's called reassortments, which means that if a human or an animal gets infected with more than one type of influenza, they exchange genetic parts, and they can come out very, very different. And we think that is what has led to the four influenza pandemics that we've had in this century, is that exactly happens. And so we're very worried about the mutations. And most recently, what happened is some researchers went back. As I mentioned, a year ago, we had a dairy worker in Texas get infected. They looked at that virus, and then they looked at how the virus is today. And it was very concerning, because what they noticed is that the changes in the virus, the mutations, have been ones that appear to make it more likely to infect humans or have the potential to do so, and it more likely to cause more severe disease, whereas what we've seen in most of those that have gotten infected from cattle is that they've typically had mild illnesses. What is really different, and you mentioned a couple of the terribly severe cases, there's more, and these very severe cases, including some recent deaths, including on April 8th, a 3-year-old in Mexico died who was previously known to be healthy. It is the strain that is not being transmitted by the cows, but by the wild birds. And so the teenager, the 13-year-old girl in Canada, who was severely ill in the ICU for a protracted period of time and had to have extraordinary life-saving measures, she had this strain from the birds. And then we had a man in Louisiana die. He had the strain from the birds, not the cow. And then we've had a person in Wyoming get severely ill. So fortunately, they survived. And then a poultry worker in Ohio became severely ill, fortunately survived. But we are seeing more of this, and that has got us really, really concerned that we're not taking more steps to surveil it and more steps to prepare if it does get to the point where it could spread efficiently in humans.
So, Dr. Pate, I have about 2.5 minutes left with you. And you mentioned the Biden administration was slow to act on this. That's very true. It took the Biden administration a month before the U.S. Department of Agriculture actually required cows to be tested before interstate travel. And now we have the Trump administration who's basically let go of the people who test for avian flu, who do the research on avian flu. I don't believe you are the only health professional who is concerned about using the P word, pandemic. But what are your concerns about this becoming a pandemic?
I don't know whether it will, but if you asked me for my list of top 5 candidates, this would have to be at the top. And again, just for the reasons I'm saying, if we seldom, when a pandemic occurs, we seldom see all the things that lead up to it. But I feel like we're watching a slow motion movie. And if I was writing the script for what are each of the steps that should cause increasing alarm, we are ticking them off one by one. Again, doesn't necessarily mean this will become a pandemic, but it wouldn't be unheard of. As I've said, there were 4 other pandemics that were started by avian influenza viruses, even though avian influenza viruses in general aren't very efficient at infecting humans. They can evolve so, and that's what we're watching. And that's why we need to be taking this seriously. Frankly, I would wish we would spend the money researching bird flu instead of redoing studies about MMR and autism.
Well, with that, Dr. Pate, really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to us about all of these important topics. We've been talking with Dr. David Pate. He is the former CEO of St. Luke's Health System. He is also the co-author of the book, Preparing for the Next Global Outbreak. And remember, if you have questions about public health and you would like Dr. Pate to answer those questions, you can send us an email, idahomatters@boisestate.edu, and we will do our best to get those answered for you. This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudet.